Okay, for tonight we're going to have 4 different pathways as we walk our way through SMMware. We're going to start with this one in the middle in blue, which is kind of a core pathway. We're going to start with inquiries and move on to clients. And from there, we'll explain jobs, how to enter hours and expenses, and we'll also look at invoices. We're looking at the home page. We're going to start with the inquiry section, which is the equivalent of a sales lead. And we'll look at the profiles. You can see the usual fields that you might expect, first name, last name, and so on. But there's a few more that I'd like to point out. For SMMware, referrers are broken down into 3 categories. The main category would be something like real estate as a general category, say Smith Realty as the specific company, and then Jane Doe as the agent at that company who gave you the reference or referred business to you. The profile includes some custom fields. Okay, some people are saying that there's some issues with the layout. Switch it. You should see me in the lower corner, and my desktop should be taking up most of the screen with just a thumbnail of me in the corner. If you mouse over the thumbnail, I believe you can reverse it, and I think that's why some people have me in the small corner and some people have me on the big screen. So when I fix it for some people, I'm reversing it for others, looks like. But I think you can fix that by looking for a button in the lower left-hand corner. Okay, going back to our custom fields, there are labels that can be customized for each SMMware client. There is actually 12 of them, but we hide the ones that you are not currently using. For people who are having the reverse with my desktop in the lower end corner, I'd like to know if when you mouse over, you're able to see an arrow like this. If you could mention it in the chat room. I'd like to know if this is any better for people. And what does this do for people? How is this? Okay. All right. Well, you're just going to have to make do without seeing my smiling face, but at least the desktop is maximized. But I am still here. Okay, sounds like people are in better shape as far as seeing the desktop, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So we talked about the custom fields. This is something called the status boards. I just wanted to touch on it right now, and we'll talk more about it in a future part of this webinar. And there's a place for the original address for your clients, for tentative addresses. You can, if someone does not give you the work, you can change their status to be declined. And you can, if they do give you the work, you can also promote them to a client. I'll go ahead now to look at a client profile. And I think the first point is just that it's all the same fields, all the same information that was there as an inquiry is carried over. So it's nothing that you'd have to retype, you just promote them. There's the same custom fields. Also, I should mention client representatives. One of the ways in which SMMware is optimized for senior move managers is recognizing that some of your clients may not be able to represent themselves, and you have a client representative. So this is the list of people who've served as client representative in the past, which can be useful if you have attorneys who do so repeatedly. You can add new client representatives to the list with this button right here. You can also indicate what the relationship is, whether it's attorney or adult child, etc. And if there are any jobs created for this client already, then they will be listed here where you can quickly click on them and get to the details. And I would like to explain why we have the separate concept of jobs, because you may work for the same client multiple times over a number of years. And when you look at the work and hours that were put in and expenses that were put in for a client, rather than have you try to distinguish one batch of work from another by just looking at a bunch of dates in the same area and then another bunch of dates in the same area, we formalize that by gathering them in one bucket called a job. So we'll go ahead and take a look at a job. Actually, before we move on from clients, I wanted to point one more thing out. That you can designate whether a client is willing to act as a reference. When you first start with that client, they default to unasked, and then later on you can talk to them and figure out yes or no. And that'll be useful in other parts of the program. It's also here on the client listing where you can filter it based on whether they can act as a reference. You can also filter it based on status and also dates. All right, so as we were going on to jobs, jobs also have custom fields. There's actually 28 of them, and people ask what use is normal for a custom field. And for a client profile, you might put in something like whether they have pets or the pet name. For the job profile, then you might have something, details about the home. And the difference between the two is that the custom fields for a client are things that go with the client from house to house. Custom fields for the job are ones that are specific to a house. A job has a job type, which can be fairly general, like downsize and move. It can be very fine-grained, like floor plan. This list can be configured for each SMMware client. There's also job status, such as active. You can indicate a team lead. There's another status board here. This one is for operations, whereas in contrast to the first one, which was for sales. Also, there are two different ways that you can charge your clients from within SMMware. One way is called the per job rate, where it's the same hourly rate regardless of the type of task. And the other one is per job codes, where different kinds of tasks are assigned codes, and each code has an hourly rate associated with it. While we're here, I'm going to show you the file manager. Within SMMware, files are tagged. And the underlying thinking is that you would walk into a room, take some photos, you upload all those photos at once with the tag, with the appropriate tag. So if you're in the bedroom, you can go ahead and put bedroom 1. Also, this list is configurable per SMMware client as well. So if you want to add more rooms like master bedroom or something like that, and some people have completely different schemes. So go ahead and upload a couple of photos. And it works the same way from a mobile device where you can multi-select. And I've gone ahead and selected 3 files, and I've given them a tag. I'll go ahead and upload the documents. As the documents are being uploaded, in this case images, they are also being downsized. As you know, phones these days might take 3 megabyte photos, and they have tons of detail. It's really way more detail than you need. These photos are being downsized to about 100 kilobytes, and they have more than enough detail based on the opinions of everyone I've spoken to so far. You can also rotate images. You can rename them. We can also filter the list of photos. So sometimes people have 70 photos here, and you want to narrow it down based on one type of tag at a time. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to enter hours and miles and expenses. Simply enter the date and the job. You can do different jobs. It doesn't have to be the same job. So if somebody works for an entire week and then they put their hours in all at once, they can still do it from just the one screen. This particular system is set up for you to enter your hours based on the start time and the end time. The other option for that is to just have a single field where you enter the overall hours. You can also enter your miles from here. The description field, you can enter as long of a description as you like, but there is a pick list here. And that's particularly handy if you're on a phone where it's not quite as easy to type. As far as the miles are concerned, SMMware has a formula that includes miles that don't count. So this system is set for 35. So for instance, when someone has driven 45 miles, and this is the round trip distance, they would be paid for the last 10 because 35 are miles that they're not paid for. So the 10 miles that they're paid for at this certain rate comes up with the amount that they're paid for travel. And since it's been so long since the date that they were worked, that the hours are put in, these are flagged as being late, which results in an email going to an administrator so that people are not sneaking in hours that don't get noticed. And then maybe perhaps you send out an invoice and don't wind up not including those hours because you didn't know about them, things like that. Going back to the data entry page, the hours that have been entered are on this lower screen, and they can be edited and deleted from here until such time as they're part of an invoice. Let's see if there's some here that are. And then they will disappear off this list when they are part of an invoice, or if the transfer to Quickbooks Online. I'm sorry, when the job is closed, that's when they disappear off that list, but they're editable until they've been included in an invoice or transfer to Quickbooks Online. For entering the expenses, I should mention that since I'm logged in as an administrator, I have the option of entering hours and expenses on behalf of any of the employees, but a normal employee would come directly to this screen. And you start off in much the same way as you do for the hours and miles. You pick vendor, and then you can indicate whether that expense is reimbursable, which is to say that the employee paid for it out of pocket and they need to be paid back, or it can be a company expense, which means that they use a company credit card. And again, you can have a long description if you want, as much as you care to type, or you can use the pick list. And I should mention that the period of time between when the hours were worked and when they get entered is configurable as well. This system is set for 3 days. And I would also like to mention flat fees. SMMware includes the idea of instead of counting boxes on a box-by-box basis for packing materials, you can have a flat fee, and we have a preset for that. In this case, the preset includes not just the description, but also the price. Within SMMware, there is an underlying philosophy that these presets, these pick lists, they are intended to help save you some typing, but they're not intended to constrain you. So you can always come in and override the values that were put into the boxes for you. And while we're working in these two areas, I'd like to mention there's a page for standard forms. So it has an area where you can edit the text, and whatever you put in goes here. And you also have a file manager here as well, so you can upload. And I should mention that the file manager does not just images, it also you can upload binary files, Word documents, and Excel files, and PDFs, and so on. So this is intended for like an intake form, something that people sometimes need to download and print out because they're going to fill it out with the client there, perhaps. We're trying to have everything put directly into SMMware, but recognize that that doesn't always happen. So we still allow for you to have some forms to print out. There's also a page for training documents, and you can also have a text field here, and also a file manager. And from here, I'm going to go to look at invoices, staying on the path that we talked about earlier of this core path of functionality. So this is the Invoice Manager. You can have itemized invoices. You can have flat fee invoices. An invoice has various levels of status. The preliminary status means that it's kind of a scratch pad and you don't want anyone to really do anything with it, like approve it or send it out. And SMMware does include a process for approval whereby team leads, who are the people that were on site, they know that various employees were in fact there, they know what work was done. The intention is that they would do the approvals here. And after you've gotten the invoice ready for approval, you count it as finalized. They come in and they approve it. And so once it's finalized, they get this approve button. As an administrator, I also have the ability to approve it. There's a space for invoice adjustments. So for instance, in this case, a vase was broken and $50 was agreed on as the price. And there's a note here that appears only on the invoice. There's a note here that is strictly for internal company use. And of course, the amount of the invoice. And this is a drop-down that shows the address history for the client. We know that when you're moving somebody that you might be sending the invoice to the old address, you might be sending the invoice to the new address. It can be a little bit confusing, or it's certainly not predictable. So we give you a drop-down, you pick from that list, and it'll fill out the fields for you. Also, if there's a client representative, their address will appear on that list as well, and it'll say care of. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and approve this invoice. After an invoice is approved, then you have these buttons. they generate PDFs, and they allow you to send the invoice via email. Go ahead and show you the first format. There are 3 formats that are offered by SMMware. The first one is a summary form. So it really just only has a few line items that give you the grand totals. There is a detailed format where each and every entry is appearing on the invoice. So if you do have clients that really want to see the nitty-gritty, on a given day, if you have 5 people that worked at the property, then there'll be 5 line items. But on the other hand, that's a lot of detail, and not everybody wants to see so much. So there is a third format called the roll-up format. And for this one, there's only a single entry per day, and the description of the hours, the description of the services performed comes from the team lead. So you have the 3 different formats. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our first track. I'm going to go ahead and close out these invoices, since we don't need them anymore. And we'll move on to the second part of our trip, organizations and contacts, which is preferred vendors and the people who work there. Actually, I just remembered one point. I'd like to go back and to the client fields, client profiles. If you work with the same senior living centers on a regular basis, rather than make you go to their listing and then copy and paste addresses, we give you this drop down. And clicking on it will pre-fill the fields for you, so then you only have to fill out the apartment number. I remember that because we're in the section where the senior living centers are listed. So this is the organizations. These are your preferred vendors, and these are a mixture of people who you recommend to do work, such as plumbers, but it's also people where you spend money. And I'm going to go ahead and open one of these. We distinguish between, let me go back to show you from a different profile. Okay, once somebody is transferred to QuickBooks Online as a vendor, this becomes uneditable. But this is the checkbox that you mark to say that this is somebody that you spend money with. Other than that, there's the usual fields about the company name, the addresses. If there's anybody, if they have any specific contacts listed, then they would show up here. You can click on the edit button to go right to them. And I would point out that the organizations also has a file manager. So if a senior living center gives you a PDF, you can store that within SMMware. And from here, I'm going to, I'll go back to the listing page. I was going to point out that you can export your organizations. You can click on entire categories. You can pop open a given category and select a few of them. And then you click on the export button, and you'll get a comma-separated variable format file. Also, this is a good time to mention the search feature. And instead of going to the organization's listing and going down to the right category, opening the right category, and then clicking on edit, you can just search based on the first and last names or the company names. And the search results are divided into sections, one from clients and inquiries, one from your organizations, one from contacts, and one from associates. The contacts are arranged in much the same way, where it defaults to a categorized view, but you also have an alphabetical view, and you can also export it as a CSV file. The fields for a contact are pretty much what you expect in terms of first name, last name, email, and so on. But I would just like to point out 2 fields in particular. The system does distinguish between contacts who act as a client representative versus those who don't. When you're filling out a client profile, rather than have, and you want to set a client rep, rather than have a really, really long list of all your contacts, by setting this checkbox, we let you narrow that list down to just the people who act as client reps. If this is someone who refers business to you, then you can check mark this, and that will be used for some of the CRM functionality, and we'll be covering that in more detail later. And again, you can upload files for a contact as well. I want to make sure I've covered these particular areas. Okay, so unless there's some questions about this particular section, that's what I wanted to show you about organizations and contacts. And from here, we will move on to the next section, which is calendars, tasks, notes, and calls. Start with the calendar. On the home page, there's a variety of features that we'll be covering shortly, but right now I just wanted to point out the calendar portion of it. This particular calendar shows only events that you are part of, so it's not cluttered with all the events that don't have anything to do with you. And from the home page, we're going to go to the master calendar. There is someone designated as the main contact for an event, and they will be the ones who get any correspondence for the invitation system. There are tags for the event types, and there are the default ones are job, client, and associate related. So for instance, if you click on job, then you'll be asked to use the drop down to select the job. And again, you need to know where your employees have to go for the job. We have a couple of buttons here that allow you to insert the address. There's a couple of spots where you can set reminders. And as the system sends out emails due to various changes you might make in the configure or into the details, you might feel that the system is not going to know if the detail is minute enough not to bother people. But we do give you the ability to say, all right, we're going to skip the notification. So if you're just correcting something that is really not very substantive, then you can just skip the email part of it. So from here, we come to the part about attendee management. And SMMware offers 3 different ways of handling attendee management. The first one is called direct. The idea here, the underlying thinking is that sometimes it happens that you are on the way back, driving back in a group from one job, and you talk about the next one and decide who's going to go. So you don't really need SMMware to help you figure out who's going to go, but you still want to document what's happening within the system. And that's what direct attendee management does for you. So you simply pick who's going to be going, and when you click on save, they all get an email saying you've been added to this event. The next approach is called invitation-based, and we ask you to set a response date, which is not really tied into the system in a concrete way. It appears in the email that gets sent out to the team members, and the idea is just to prod them and give them something specific, something concrete as a deadline for when they have to respond by. But if you're the main contact for the event, you're not constrained by this date and time. You can wait until after that to make your choice, or if circumstances dictate it, you can make your choice ahead of time. So there are a couple of different ways that people use this particular feature for. If you distribute your work based on a first come first served basis, then if you need 3 people, then you put that you want 3 people. And after the first 3 people respond to the invitation, anyone after that will be told that this team is full. But if you would prefer, you can put a large number here, and in this way, no one will be told that the team is full. They respond to the invitation not by saying, yes, I will work at this event. They respond saying, yes, I'm interested. And then there's the team, the contact for the event gets to pick which ones are most suitable for this job. So for instance, if you need 3 people and 5 people are interested, then you'll just pick the 3 that you think are either suited based on the skill sets, or maybe you're trying to spread the work around evenly. Okay, that brings us to our third approach, which is called availability based. And this is different than the first two, where the first two are, the underlying thinking is that you start, it's client driven. You start with the client, you agree on the date and the time, and then after that it's up to you to fill in those slots. Now for this approach, you know ahead of time the employees are putting in their availability, and then you sit down with the client and you kind of negotiate with them, and you say, okay, we have 2 people who are available on Thursday at 8 a.m. We have 3 people who are available on Friday at 10 a.m., something like that. Before I do anything here, I'm going to go show you what it's like for an employee to enter their availability. Let's move up ahead to a blank week. So you simply look at the dates and the times and drag and drop whatever is applicable. And you can move the items around, you can stretch them, and you can get rid of them. So as you can see, it's a pretty quick task to fill out availability. It's really no time at all. Once availability is filled out and you are creating this this event, you come to this screen. This is kind of your workstation right here, your working space. This little bar is called the time slot, and this is how you indicate what the time ought to be. So we're going to say, so that looks like 9:30 to 1 p.m. And so I'm going to shorten it up just to make more people fit. So then you look at the time slot. You can look down the list of people who are available. You click on the ones who work. And if there was somebody that didn't, actually they all work under this circumstance, move it over here. All right, so this person got bounced out of the running because they no longer are suitable or they don't fit in there. But this one still does. So now you can say you got 3 people. See if we're all filled out. And then when you come back, they are now designated as being assigned. But if something changes, then somebody calls in and says, hey, I have a doctor's appointment, I can't make it, you can release them. When you first click on them, then the blue means that they are unavailable for other work. When you hit save, this time will not be released and be available again. If you click on the blue, now the whole thing turns green, which indicates that, so for instance, if you thought you needed 4 people, but it turns out you only need 3, so you remove one of the team members from the event, but they're still available to do work on other jobs. So you still want them, you don't want that chunk of time to disappear. And that is a pretty good overview of how availability works. And of course, there's emails that go out once you finalize everything and you click on save. If there's no questions about the calendaring, then I will go ahead and move on to tasks, notes, and calls. So within different profiles, you'll find a section called tasks. And let's go ahead and start a new task just to see what the fields look like. Janine was asking what the calendar looks like with multiple jobs. So each one of these, this is a day that has a couple of events. This day actually has 4. When you click on it, it has all the details. And that's, does that answer your question? Okay, excellent. Okay, so we want to go to, oh, that's right. That was where I wanted to be, but we'll get back there. New task. All right, so the fields for a new task, there's the due date, there's priority levels, there's the drop-down for who you assign it to. Later on, as the task moves along, you might it might go into a waiting period when you're waiting for the client, and of course it'll go from not started to started and eventually to finished. And when it's finished, you put in a completion date, there's reminder emails, and then there's a short summary field and a longer description field. So those are the fields for one task. And as you worked with the system for a while, then you'll notice that you're entering the same kinds of tasks from one job to another. And you start asking if there's a way for entering multiple tasks quickly. And the answer is yes. This set of buttons right here are called task groups, and they each represent multiple tasks. In this case, this one is called Pet Care, and it has 3 tasks in it. If you do not need one of those 3 tasks in this particular case, you can just get rid of it. But you can see that the summary is already filled out, the notes are already filled out. It can be already assigned to somebody. That's all part of the configuration. And from there, you can just modify the due date and the reminders. And the priority can also be preset. But using this, it helps with consistency, because if you normally have 8 or 9 tasks, it would be easy to forget one of them. But by having it as part of a task group, you just scroll down the list and you'll see them all, and it makes it pretty much guaranteed you won't forget one of them. It also helps with consistency, because if the short and the long descriptions are pre-filled out, you might have to tweak it a little bit with a few of the custom details, but by and large it will be the same, and that helps with consistency, as I mentioned. Also, tasks that are past their due date are shown in red so that you know that there's an issue there. And from here, when we get to the home page, there'll be more about tasks where we make use of this information. So for Janine, yes, the task groups are completely customizable. The names of the task group and all the tasks within them, that's all customizable. From here, I'll show you the notes. And the notes show you, they build up a track record for a given job, client, or wherever you happen to be within the system. It shows you who created the note. It shows you when they created the note. So in that way, you can, if 2 notes are in some way contradicting each other, the more recent note is most likely the most recent information. And also, if you always know who to talk to because you know who entered the note. And the different employees cannot edit each other's notes. They can just add more notes. You can edit your own note, but you can't edit each other's notes unless you're an admin. Okay, calls. They work very similar to tasks. Instead of a due date, it's a call date. You have a direction, so either you're calling them or they're calling you. And you can set reminders, and then there's the summary and the long description and the status. From here, I'm going to go to the home page. We're going to start going through some of the functionality found there. Within the job profile, I mentioned the status board. Thing that is here is available to all employees. This particular item is only available to, status board is only available to the higher permission users. And this is intended as kind of a 30,000-foot overview of how your company is doing. And as you can see, it is color-coded. So at the end of the day, if you can scroll down this list and everything is in green, you can sleep easy that night. But if there is something in red, at least it jumps out at you so that you know exactly where you have to focus your attention. The scheme behind the tags regarding the colors and the labels, that is also customizable. here we have the other status board. This one is for sales. And in this case, it's arranged under the scheme of cold lead, medium lead, hot lead. And again, you can have that customized as well. The next section is called My Tasks, and every employee has that, and it will have a listing of all the tasks that are assigned to them. This is called All Unfinished Tasks, and this is company-wide, it's for higher level users. And this way you can see everything that's going on across the entire company. That list can get fairly long, and rather than when you're wondering if a certain task has been completed, then rather than have you scroll down this list and try and pick it out, we give you a separate section where if a task has been completed within the last 5 days, it will show up on this list. So that gives you reassurance that that it really is complete, at least as far as the assurances of the team lead or the person who completed the task. And this is called My Calls and this is every employee, something every employee sees. And as it sounds like, it shows you a list of your calls. Invoices needing my approval. If you are a team lead, then if there are invoices where you're the team lead on that job, and it's at the point where it needs approval, then it shows up in this list here. There is an option within SMMware for approval of hourly and miles and expense items before they can appear on invoice. So that is another level of approval. And if you have that in place, then team leads have this section which tells them what they need to approve. And then team members have this section, My Hourly and Expense Items that need revision. So if the team lead looks at your item and says that something is wrong with it, you'll get a message here, and you can edit it and resubmit it to the system. This next section is if you're a team lead on a job. This gives you a kind of a list of everything that's on your plate as a team member or as a team lead. And I know that people can act as team leads on some jobs, but be a team member on other jobs. It kind of rotates around. And both of these will appear as needed. Everyone sees My Team as member, and team leads see this section. And we mentioned under contacts that some people refer business to you, and their profile also has your last contact date. And what this section does is it gathers up the ones that you're most out of touch with, and it prods you to get back in touch with them. The underlying thinking is that if they stop talking to you or stop sending business to you because they're upset about something, the last thing you want is for like a month or two to pass by without you even noticing, and this system helps you keep in touch with them. The next two sections have to do with your clients acting as a reference. The first one is the kind of list that you want when you're on a sales call. So you can pick 3 out and then go to their profiles and provide details. And the next one has to do with maintaining that first list. So as a job gets closed out, then if they are still unasked, they will pop up in this list, and you use this as a pick list to work through it and keep your references fresh. And that brings us back down to the homepage calendar, which is your events. Before I finish out this chunk of the tour, I'll just point out a couple of other sections. There's a referrals report, which lets you see where your business is coming from. And there's a few reports about how the company credit card has been used. And there's the payroll expense mileage report, so that you can, if you're not integrating with, say, Quickbooks Online, you can see this is not a full, I'll go ahead and take a look at it. So this is not necessarily a full payroll service. It doesn't cut checks, but it does give you the raw numbers in terms of, let's pick on somebody. So it does give you the raw numbers in terms of, for a given, normally you would set the start date and the end date for a given pay period, and then you hit the filter button to just pull up those appropriate items. And then you can see here what the overall hourly pay is. You can see if you need to reimburse them, and you can see if you have to pay them for mileage. And there are details hidden away in this expandable section, So you can see the rate, the overall miles, and things like that. And I would also mention that the help section is context sensitive. So when you are in any given page and you click on help, you're going to get help for that page. Okay, so I believe that finishes out our third section. And we'll move on to the fourth and final section, which is the MailChimp integration and the QuickBooks Online integration. Going back to, we'll use a profile here. So when you click in, when you enter an email address, and if you have the MailChimp integration in place, when you click Save, it will upload that email address to lists on MailChimp, where you can have one list for clients and inquiries. You can have another list for associates, in case you ever need to mass mail your associates, and you can have a list for contacts. You can have those three or any one of them. Moving on to the QuickBooks Online. The starting point for that is to make the connection with QuickBooks. All right, so now it shows that we are currently connected. I'm going to go ahead and enter some hours. So very quickly, I'm going to enter in a week's worth of hours. So just bear with me for a moment. If you, the system is set for 35 miles as the limit, so if we go under 35, it won't result in any payment. So I'm keeping them all at the point where they'll result in some sort of payment. All right, so we've just made some entries. And I'm going to go ahead and record a couple of expenses as well. And I'm going to do it for the same employee. And we'll do one that's a company expense, one that is a reimbursable expense. All right, so now we have some hours, we have some miles, we have some expenses. And this command is under associates and my hours, expense, mileage history. And we can use this to filter for the various events. So this would normally be a pay period. and we can see that previous example, I already did this, and they have some items that are already transferred over to QuickBooks Online. You can transfer items one by one, but the normal usage is to come up to the top of the page and just click the one button and say go ahead and add all of them at once. All right, so we can see here that there were 5 days where we had hours and 5 entries here. And we can see that there is a company expense that was also transferred over. The mileage payments and the reimbursable expenses are gathered together. So there's 6 line items here that total 6206. And now we're over at QuickBooks Online. This is a developer's copy that they provide to developers such as myself. And the various entries are spread out around within QuickBooks Online. I'm going to go to the audit log because that's a convenient place where all of our entries are gathered together. And you can see here the various time charges and time activities. These result in the charges to the client and the payments to the employee. You can see the check that will be written to the employee for the reimbursable expense plus the travel. And see, there's the company, or the expense that was put on the company credit card is here under the billable expense charge. So that is kind of the essence of how QuickBooks Online, or information is transferred to QuickBooks Online through SMMware. So as you can see, it's obviously you don't have to retype hours and retype descriptions. It all gets transferred automatically. There are other areas within SMMware. For Janine, I should mention that there's a hierarchy of entities or objects where at the top might be an invoice. Below that is the client, and below that is the hours, the mileage, and the expenses. And then below that, at the bottom level of the pyramid, would be the employees, the clients, and the vendors. And SMMware is smart enough to look at that whole pyramid. So if you're transferring over something from the top of the pyramid, that it fills in everything underneath it. So for Janine, the short answer would be yes, it does copy the client information. And I'll mention that whereas we have the flat fees for if you want to handle packing materials just as a simple flat fee, we also do have an inventory system. So if you do want to track box by box and so on, you can use that. And we also have a consignment module, which handles the complete life cycle of consignment sales, assuming that it assumes that you have a third-party vendor who's going to handle the sales, that you accept the item, then you show the system shows you that you moved it over to the consignment dealer. Later on, you get payment from them. It helps you deal with sending the checks to the client and so on. And this is not something that gets used a lot, so I wasn't planning on going into detail on it, but I did want to make sure that people are aware of it just in case it is relevant for you. So this is pretty much the conclusion of the tour. If you have any more questions, I'd be happy to stick around online and answer them, but I think we've covered the ground pretty well. And again, in conclusion, we are holding a raffle where the prize is 3 months free subscription to SMMware. And you can get that by following our Facebook page. You go to facebook.com, SMMware LLC. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to our mailing lists. And the same person can do all 3 of those, and they count as 3 entries, up to 2 people per company. And the results will be announced November 1st. All right, so I think that concludes our webinar for tonight. If anyone has any follow-up questions that come up later on, I'd be happy to answer them. But other than that, I believe we're ready to wrap it up. So I thank you very much for your time, and everyone have a good evening. Okay, good night all. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Janine, and thank you, Tricia. Okay, again, good night.